Welcome back to another episode of the Your Houston podcast. This is your host, Mario Castillo. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you can catch all of our episodes.
And speaking of like and subscribe, please also go down in those comments and let us know if you'd like to hear. Welcome to Your Houston podcast. This is your host, Nicholas Hall.
Welcome back, Nick.
It's good to be here. How you doing, Mario?
I'm doing better now that you're here, but I think the real question is, how are you doing?
Well, I'm happy to be here, that's for sure, because that means I've got some time. You know, being an attorney, sometimes things heat up. So, and it's great that we're a little bit less distanced, you know. I could maybe, no, I can't. We're still a little bit distanced, but it's good to be back, you know. I think you did a great job while I was out, and so thank you for covering for me.
Well, we had some really great guests. We had some great episodes, a lot of useful information, but we're glad to have you back to this episode where we are kicking off our Pride series of podcasts. And for those of you out there listening, in June, we're going to release 3 podcasts that highlight local LGBTQ leaders and the work that they do in the community. And today we're starting with Jovon Tyler, the president of the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. And we'll be speaking to him about his history with activism in the city. It started when he was 18, the work that the caucus does for advancing equality here in Houston, and how you can get involved if you feel so inclined.
Yeah, this is a great episode. I learned a lot, and I thank you for your leadership because you also serve on the caucus. So, you know, let's get to it.
Let's do it.
Now's the part of the show where we're going to do liftoff. Are you ready?
I feel the liftoff. The clock has started. Roger.
So, Jovon, this is the part where we're going to ask you some rapid-fire questions, get the cognitive matter stretching and flowing, those brain juices flowing, so we can move into the interview questions. So, first question, your favorite Houston restaurant, what are you going to order? And it's a free meal. You can go anywhere you want to in Houston. It's your favorite restaurant, and what are you going to order?
Yeah, Houston has so many amazing restaurants. It's hard to kind of pin that question down. Let's see, what is my favorite restaurant? So I actually cook. And so typically my favorite restaurant is my own house. But if I'm forced to go to a restaurant, I don't exactly know the answer to that. Next. Can I say next?
You can.
Really
How about this? What's the last restaurant you went to in Houston and what did you order?
It had to be before the pandemic.
All right. Well, hey, we'll move on.
I can't remember.
Go, Mario.
Thank you.
I will say that almost everyone has given some Tex-Mex restaurant, some form of a Tex-Mex restaurant when we've asked that question. Next question, in your opinion, what city other than Houston has the best gayborhood?
Oh, I would say easily San Francisco, probably. I would say San Francisco. Maybe different parts of New York City. Mm-hmm. But certainly San Francisco.
Yeah, it's really unique there, and there's so much history, and they preserve it. It's special.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful city. So, next question: who would you book for the next rodeo concert guest?
Can they be dead or alive, or do they have to be alive?
Sure, we'll open it up.
All right, so the only person that was ever at the rodeo that I would have loved to have seen, but I didn't get to see, was probably one of the rodeo's first performers. And it was the only time he performed there, and he performed 2 nights back to back. And that was Elvis Presley.
Wow.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yep. Okay, so if you could have a conversation with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
Man, that's there's a lot. Probably this guy right here. This right here is my grandmother's grandfather. And I would ask him what was his hope and his dream for his family. to see that many generations later, if we are achieving it, how far off the mark we are, or if we've exceeded his dream for his family.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
It's
he was
deep.
born in 1860. He was born in 1861, which was close to the end of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so, however, he himself was not a slave. And so that would be an interesting conversation to have.
Absolutely.
Solid answer. You're doing well so far, Jovon. So I'm going to try to catch you off guard here with this last one. We're really going to get those brain juices flowing. What is the next big funeral or burial trend?
Well, we've had funerals since the beginning of time, and they are historically the same kinds of events. You get two choices: you get cremation, and you get traditional burial. And in all of the centuries that has been an occurrence, those continue to be the number one and number two choices of many of my clients. For myself personally, because I have no interest in being in the retort, nor do I have any interest in being buried. I am in a strange situation in which I'm hoping to be frozen.
Okay.
There you go. See, what I want is, how those people get their ashes compressed into a cubic zirconium, I think is the proper terminology. They call it a diamond.
That is, yes, but that's only a small. What a lot of people don't understand with that is that that's not the entire cremated remain. It's basically a thimble of cremated remains that they use to make that. So one has to then determine what happens to the rest of the cremated remains.
See, what I was going to say is I want to take that to the next level in this digital age. I want to become an NFT for Ethereum. That's what I want to become, somehow to make that happen.
I think I'm going to go with the ashes that are with seeds that grow into a tree or something.
That'd be my fallback. So we can plant a forest.
Okay, well, we're going to move right on into our interview, and we're grateful for you spending some time with us to talk about the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. This episode is the first in our Pride series of podcasts that will be released in June. And before we get into the caucus, I think, because you have a unique history with the organization, being on the board at such a young age, coming back later to now be the president. Talk to us about your history in activism in Houston and just sort of how you've seen things change as you've been involved.
Sure. I'm glad to talk about this. So I've been an activist as young as I can remember. My grandmother actually used to on a fish market in the neighborhood that I grew up in which we supported a lot of civil rights causes in our neighborhood. And so when I left home at 15 and was able to get some footing underneath me, the first two groups I joined were ACT UP and Queer Nation. And I was probably the youngest person there. I was 17. And what I enjoyed most about those two organizations was that we would show up and we would scream and we would raise hell. And so I got a lot of theatrical lung power out of me in those experiences. And as ACT UP started to wind down, Sue Lovell, the former city council person, came to us and said, "Hey, I need for y'all to come and join the caucus." And so at 18 at that time, that's when I first came to the caucus. And it was a lot different than ACT UP and Queer Nation. It actually was better because we had access to the people that we were basically showing up and screaming at. And as an 18-year-old, that was a really exciting time in my life. It was sort of in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, and a lot of people that I grew up knowing and participated in activism with have died. And so as folks started dying heavily between 1992 and when I left activism in 1999, most of those people have died. Now, I've remained in activism, not necessarily LGBTQ activism. I went on to work for the YMCA, working in poor neighborhoods in Brazil. I have a school that I helped build for HIV/AIDS orphans in Lusaka, Zambia. It took me 5 years of flying back and forth to Africa to get that built. And it wasn't until after the election of Anise Parker and close to the end of her time as our mayor that I ended up going back to the caucus, like many old timers, for the screening and endorsement races. And so that was kind of my, I'm back. And there was a resignation of the last president midterm, and some folks reached out to me and asked me if I would run for presidency at the caucus. And I initially said no, because it had been so many years, nearly 20 years since I had been in a leadership role in the organization. And Lou reminded me that rather than sitting on the sidelines and complaining about what the caucus is or isn't doing, that I needed to run for president and affect the change that I wanted to see in the world. So that's what I did.
Oh, great.
So I was able to condense the last 25 years into 3 or 4 minutes.
I think you did a wonderful job. For the audience and people who are not familiar, what role is the GLBT Caucus doing to advance equality in and around Houston?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that the average person would say that our power is in our card. The caucus has, over the years, done a heck of a job in meeting candidates, screening candidates to determine what their different positions and views are. And there is a very vigorous endorsement meeting in which there's often blood left on the floor, and that gets produced in our endorsement flyer or endorsement card that we hand out all over the city. And so for most people, that is our main function. But as an organization historically, we are usually the first activists that visit with politicians, police chiefs, sheriffs, clergy, any other leaders in the city, in the state, and sometimes even the nation, as it relates to LGBT human rights. We are there, and I imagine we will always be there. It is quite an extraordinary organization that has existed unbroken for the last 46 years. And even though we've had people sort of come and go, the organization itself has remained.
So it does a lot of formal vetting of political candidates and finds out what their platform and what they speak towards, and kind of gives some guidance as to what's most appropriate for the caucus.
Absolutely.
So as a fellow local nonprofit, Your Houston, we focus primarily on quality of life issues, transportation, housing, mobility, resiliency. Do you see overlap there with the caucus? Do you see those issues coming into play with your members, or just as y'all are out advancing equality around the city?
I think that the short answer is yes. I think that 20 years ago, that the main sort of caucus person that they would say that they just wanted to exist like everybody else. And I think that in 2021, by and large, minus maybe transgender folks, the LGB crowd that we care about our city. We are a part of the wheel that makes the city go round and round. And so, yeah, I would say that that's something that folks care very passionately about.
So, it's the GLBT. So what about the Q and the plus? And what is the caucus doing to be inclusive for the non-binary community?
I would say that between this administration and the last administration, we have worked extremely hard to create the most inclusive caucus imaginable. For my own self, we have a transgender, non-binary advisory board to the president that I visit with on a pretty frequent basis, and they've helped us to change our language, change how we interact with the public, change how we present ourselves, ask our allies to do the same. Even though in my wording, I didn't say LGBTQ plus, that is who we are. And it is my hope that before my term expires, that we take one more look at our actual name and work hard to expand the LGBT to add the Q and the plus.
That's wonderful. For folks that want to support the effort, is the caucus an organization that would take donations? Do y'all fundraise? And I ask this as a member of the board and as the fundraising chair, but I want to make sure that we spread this message as far as we can.
One of my favorite things that I've been able to do in the caucus and in my normal activism life is that I've been able to create opportunities to raise money. And I'm really proud of you, Mario, in particular, as well as the caucus on the whole. I think that we've had some of the most magnificent fundraisers and best attended fundraisers in the recent history of the organization. If you say, well, I don't have $50 to give to the organization, I only have $5, you can go to www.thecaucus.org. And we actually have a fundraiser coming up on June 5th at Constable Alan Rosen's house. It is our summer fling. We're actually giving an award to 5 LGBTQ plus judges that we are really, really proud of. They are getting the John Paul Barnish Justice Award. And we have 2 co-chairs for that event. Both magnificent folks, Jeff Waters and April Ayers.
I'd like to be invited, judges. I'm a lawyer, I'd like to be at that event. So we'll wrap it up here with this last question. So we just talked about ways people can give back with money. What about time? What are ways individuals can get involved and volunteer with the organization?
Well, if folks want to send an email or actually reach out to me on Facebook, send me a message in Messenger, that would probably be the easiest way to reach out. We could certainly use more volunteers. We could certainly use more people who want to be a part of our organization and want to contribute to a more who want to participate in a God, I'm having a brain fog.
It's all right.
Anyway.
Do they block walk? I mean, so just help me understand that the caucus with volunteers, I understand that the's the vetting process for the actual candidates. Is there any other ways that people can get involved with the organization to raise awareness or otherwise do outreach?
We, because of COVID, a lot of our person-to-person activities aren't what they used to be. And so we really haven't block walked in quite a while. And so that's not something that I think that we have done. We used to, but I kind of don't want people to think that that's something that we're doing currently, because we're not. We're just kind of reopening as an organization. And so if folks want to volunteer, we do have a volunteer coordinator, and they can just reach out to me or the organization, and I'll get them connected, and then we will move forward to kind of place them where where they would best fit or where they would want to fit.
You know, Mario, you did such a great job with this podcast. I'm just going to suggest it, but maybe it's time that there's a GLBTQ plus podcast.
You know, it is a great way to reach a lot of folks and spread your message. So something to consider. Before we move on to the next segment, one last question. So what's next on the horizon for the caucus? You mentioned a lot about screening and endorsing candidates. Not a huge election year this year. Next year, that'll definitely be something to do. Are there any other initiatives or activities that the caucus will be focusing on this year beyond screening and endorsing candidates?
Well, there was a question asked earlier about inclusion. That has been one of my main focuses. We started the year off with an event called Lifter of Voices Sing, in which we celebrated African-American culture within the GLBT movement. We have a women's initiative that's coming up later on this month. We are looking at a youth day that's hopefully going to be in July or August, and then we also are looking at having a similar tribute to the Lifter of Voices Sing for our Latinx community, and so we are trying to be as many things as we can be under the LGBTQ plus IA umbrella.
Sounds like there's a lot going on. It's definitely more than just elections and candidates, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we'll be sure to link down and give all the social media channels and all the like and subscribe and all that information as well. So now's the time of the show, my favorite part, the thing I've missed for months now. I'm going to ask you a question, but first let's hear this wonderful audio that always makes my day.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Do we ever? All right, Jovon, we're going to ask you a question that's really difficult and ask you to solve it in 30 seconds or less. And I just made up that time limitation. Really, you can have a minute or two. So the mayor asks you to lead an initiative for a new equal rights ordinance. What are the first three things you do?
Well,
And I'm assuming this question's asking you, what are the first three things you put into the equal rights ordinance?
No. What are the first three things you do?
yeah. What goes in the ordinance is what the mayor does. What I do is begin building consensus within the LGBTQ plus community. Second, outside of the LGBTQ plus community. And third, start fundraising, because it's going to take a great deal of money if we want to ensure that this thing finally gets passed in our city.
You know, I think if the mayor was smart, he would ask Jovon to lead the initiative, because those are the first three things that should be done to make sure we get an equal rights ordinance here in Houston.
Well, Mayor Turner, if you're watching or listening, I think Jovon should be involved. I think that this has been a very informative session for me. I've learned a lot, and I'm glad to hear that it's expanding and trying to think of new ways to kind of rebrand, if you will, but to be as inclusive as possible to make the biggest impact towards equality in and around Houston.
It's a great organization. We appreciate your time.
And I appreciate yours. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jovon. You have a great day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, Jovon, for taking time to speak with us today. We really appreciate all that you had to share and all the work that you do here in Houston. This has been another episode of the Your Houston podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, share our content. We put out a lot of useful information, and we want to make sure it gets far and wide. And if you want to go to learn more about the caucus in person, Their Summer Fling on June 5th from 5 to 7 is an event that you can check out where you can get to meet members of the caucus, hear about the work that they do, and support them. For more information on that, you can visit www.thecaucus.org.
And until next time. Thank you for watching another episode of Your Houston, the organization where you make a difference.